Welcome to Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery. We just cut off the video, so now we're starting again. But anyway, I was saying very few things can be achieved by the individual alone. No great social movement like climate change or like civil rights or ending slavery. None of these things were done just by one person, although the idea might have started with more than one person. So I was saying in the West, we often overestimate the power of the individual. And yeah, often the things that we attribute to one individual, someone who became very famous, like Martin Luther King became famous for the I Have a Dream speech and, the spearhead of the civil rights movement, or, the women that became famous as feminists. But really, it was always more than one person, And yeah, so Josiah Royce, who's a philosophy professor from Harvard, coined the term beloved community in 1913. He saw beloved community as an all-embracing radical idea of unity for the whole human race, that those who fight for justice everywhere were part of this community, those who want a better world, who want basic human rights, who want brotherhood and sisterhood and siblinghood. Martin Luther King trained in philosophy and furthered the idea of beloved community and described the idea of beloved community in the end as reconciliation and redemption. The end is the creation of beloved community. This kind of love turns opposers into friends. And I think when Martin Luther King died, many people were extremely disillusioned, and he didn't just die, he was murdered. That maybe nonviolence wouldn't overcome evil, and that's when the movement like the Black Panthers, like more extreme and sometimes violent movements came about, because somebody who had advocated for moderation and nonviolence was gunned down by the very people he was trying to enlighten. And many people would have questioned nonviolence when that happened. So there was another peace activist, the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and he toured America during the Vietnam War, asking for an end to the war, asking for peace. And Martin Luther King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for a Nobel Peace Prize, and they were friends. And when Martin Luther King died, Thich Nhat Hanh vowed to develop a beloved community, because he saw that as one monk, what he could do was very limited compared to what he could do if he created a broad base of practitioners. And I think it's the same with spiritual practice or anything, good. Like, it's much easier to do yoga in a class, than it is to just do it on your own. It's that motivation of another person there to help you. The same with meditation. Like, often we don't feel like meditating on our own. To get in a good habit, we need the support of friends, to follow a path of wisdom. We need to also meet people who know more than we do. If you want to learn a skill, you've got to find someone who knows more than you do to help you grow that skill, or to grow a good habit or a different way of being. Sometimes we need, like, to get us out of our malaise, we need, a bit of inspiration. We need a bit of a shove, and beloved community can provide that shove towards a more aware, awakened, kind way of life. So Thich Nhat Hanh realized that the seeds of great lights for civilization don't die, but are carried on in our activism and in our communities. The same as, I suppose parents achieve a certain kind of immortality because they pass on their genes and their children, and they live on in their children. So it's almost like the fruit of a tree, like or like one great tree falls over, but then 10 young trees pop up in its place, you know, and the seeds are carried on. And I think Thich Nhat Hanh and a lot of kind of progressive Buddhists view death not just as an end, but looking at our interconnectedness, our interbeing, so that we carry on, you know, the elements go back to the elements, you know, and the person is alive in the minds of those they've inspired and in their deeds. But in our good actions, we achieve a kind of immortality. I mean, Buddhists also talk about rebirth as well, you know, but we're also reborn every moment, because we're not the same person we were a month ago or a year ago. Every moment our mind is being reborn. But someone like Martin Luther King, and many of the people in history who have just done amazing things, like William Wilberforce, who worked for the end of slavery. And there's just more people than we can count. And it's just nice to think that there are doctors in war zones and, people where there are starving children, you know, there are environmentalists, you know, trying to save trees, or researchers, you know, researching the end of cancer. Like not everybody, but many people are doing good things in quiet ways that make the world better. Like the guy who invented insulin and handed it over to the university or whoever he sold it to for $1, because he said insulin is a basic human right of people to survive. It will help humanity. It's not meant to be exploited. Yeah, healthcare is a basic human right. So if we want to stay on a good path, we need good friends who have our back. And the Buddha constantly emphasized noble community, to spend time with those who practice, those who are further ahead of us on the path, those who protect you and encourage you in virtue, and, you know, protect your good name, protect your legacy, protect your family, and don't lead you into bad things. Once the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, said, "I think spiritual friendship is half of the holy life." And the Buddha said, no, Ananda, it's the whole of the holy life. Because if you don't have people who remind you of what compassion is, who remind you of what life is about, you know, to be a good person, to purify your mind, to benefit others, it's easy to get carried away by the ethos of materialism of our time and the stress and the kind of running around like a headless chicken. You know, if everybody around you is just like, keep your head down, make money, you know, look good, succeed, you know, be ambitious, you know, there's all of these like values around us that aren't necessarily the cause of true happiness, you know. But if you have people around you who are living for more than just themselves, or more than just money, or more than just worldly success, you know, people around you who actually share what you most deeply value and remind you of that, it's so encouraging, you know. And you realize like happiness can be found in a simple life instead of everything that society tells you you need. Which, you know, often if we look at the people so-called at the top who have a lot of money and have a lot of fame, you know, their families are suing them, and, you know, that they don't know who their real friend is, because they're like, is this person just here for my money? They're all going through divorces, they're all having affairs, you know, they're all going through like really radical plastic surgery to try and look young forever, like, and like they get addicted to painkillers, and not to say that non-famous people don't have that risk either, but to me it doesn't look like a great deal of happiness, you know. Like, imagine everyone around you is just a sycophant, just there to kind of kiss your ass and not actually tell you the truth. Like, you actually don't know who your real friend is. Anyway, yeah. So there is something called the Upada Sutta, and the Buddha, spoke about friendship. And he said, just as the dawn is the forerunner of the sunrise, so good friendships are the forerunner of realizing the truth of the spiritual path, or the eightfold path, which I think we've spoken about many times, which is right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right concentration, right mindfulness, and right wisdom. So yeah, I mean, we're in a little bit of a remote place. So that's also like a challenge of how people don't really understand what we're doing. You know, like you're going up to that Buddhist monastery, that's a bit weird. You know, why does she walk around in a bed sheet? Why does she have no hair? What's that about? You just sit there and do nothing. What's that about? Is it a cult? Um, yeah, so just building community in a remote place can be a little bit more challenging in a rural area as well, where there's elements of like, you know, evangelical Christianity, and just kind of people are a bit more conservative and a bit more, um, what's that about? You know, kind of a bit more anti-religion. But, you know, in terms of Buddhists are not trying to convert people, but at the same time, any monastery needs community to survive. And uh, part of growing on the spiritual path is the healthy friendships you develop. So that is the main support for offering joy, inspiration, freshness, deep listening, you know, like plants growing around the sun. Yeah, and when a lot of people come to me online mostly and they say, you know, how can I don't want to end up in a cult. How can I find a healthy community? I don't want to be, you know, I don't know which tradition I should follow, you know. And I think it's good to look at a community and say, do people spend time after practice together? Do they speak well of each other? Is there, are they authentic with each other? Is the teacher there to benefit others, or are they there, you know, because they have a massive ego problem, or they're just after money, or they've got issues with control and manipulating people, or are they there for the right reasons, you know? So friendships need safety and intimacy and compassion and a help. The Buddha actually in the sutras, the beautiful thing about Buddhism is it's really like step by step, you know, like the Buddha gave long lists of the qualities of what a teacher-student relationship is, and what a spiritual friendship is, and what is a good spiritual friend. He described a good friendship is a person who helps you when you're vulnerable and when you're not mindful, and a refuge when you're frightened. A friend who shares your happiness and sorrow and doesn't abandon you when you're in trouble. A friend who points out what is good and encourages you to follow that. So a friend is someone who will also tell you the truth. But we have to remember that sometimes the truth is subjective. Like, so saying you look terrible in that probably isn't a really helpful thing. Whereas saying, you know, maybe you've been going to the pub a bit too much. Maybe that's probably real friendship. Or telling you something that's hard to hear, like it's time to go to a counselor or something like that, you know, which is true, but they have to cushion it. Yeah. And also a sympathetic friend who rejoices in your good fortune, stops others speaking badly about you, and yeah, encourages you on the path of wisdom. So, you know, spiritual friendship also has its limits, because a teacher or a spiritual friend is not a therapist, you know. So there are just some things that we need professional help for. And a friend, you know, also has their own problems. So there has to be give and take. It can't just be like, well, you're my spiritual friend, so I'm going to emotionally dump on you. There has to be that kind of give and take. But you know, it's such a profound thing when you find someone And I found, you know, different sanghas, they have different things to offer. They may not have everything. No sangha can give you everything. Ultimately, we do have to look inside ourselves and seek the truth ourselves, you know. The sangha is just a mirror. But having spiritual friendship can be so encouraging, especially if you're in a place where there isn't a lot of interest in that around you, you know, because it's just, we are conditioned creatures, and um, we do get easily influenced by what is going on around us. You know, like I remember being part of university Buddhist groups, and I saw these young people with so much energy to change the world and so many aspirations to make the world a better place. And then I looked at what happened to them 10 years later and how they just got worn down by all the responsibilities, marriage, kids, paying a mortgage. And most of them, you know, lost that joy and enthusiasm and energy to change the world. You know, they were just getting by and surviving. And, you know, some of them had affairs, and some of them, one of them even joined a kind of white supremacist, like really a group that was a bit anti, like had some fairly bigoted views, and that made me really sad. But you know, there were a few people who were still doing their best to keep alive their practice and do good things, you know. But it was just interesting to see how the people that didn't have good social support, spiritual support, lost their values and just became really absorbed in making money. And we need money, no doubt, but it shouldn't become the only thing. And that's what's so sad about, you know, the cost of living crisis now, because people can't pursue their dreams. You know, they're just trying to survive, and they become fearful and anxious. And when we're fearful and anxious, we don't come together in solidarity to work for good things, work for change. We withdraw into our individual lives, and just, you know, someone who is on survive and not thrive is not making altruistic good decisions. They're just in survival mode, and they withdraw into like fear. And that's why people who are like almost homeless or really poor, or who have intergenerational trauma, tend to not make good decisions, because they're just in flight and fight. They're not acting from a place of like, they get triggered. Basically, they get triggered into this kind of more, it's like the primal dinosaur part of your brain. The amygdala just freaks out and goes, you know, risk, 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 and is not like long-term planning. I noticed this a lot with the really poor people living on the street in India, because I would say to them, you know, we'll sponsor your kid for school, and they can become a teacher, and in future, in 10 or 15 years after school, they'll have a good income, and you won't be homeless anymore, and you'll have good food, and your grandchildren will be, you know, comfortable. But the people that were just begging every day couldn't think about a month from now or 5 years from now, because they were just thinking about today. Like, today I put my kid out on the street to beg and we get food. That's all they could think about. They could, because they were in flight or fight, and they had this intergenerational trauma of being homeless, being low caste, being looked down on by society, and no education and no good values around them. They couldn't plan, and they couldn't make good long-term decisions, because they were just in survival mode, you know, which is why in order for human beings to socially, spiritually, artistically thrive and be happy, we need basic justice, like a livable wage, affordable food, a functioning healthcare system. You know, this is why social justice has to be linked into spiritual values, you know, and why hoarding is an aberration, you know, that someone has so much resources while other people, you know, while other people literally starve. or live in tents. Like some people have 10 investment properties and other people are living in tents, even though they have a full-time job, yeah, so to be spiritual is also to care about what goes on in society, and that there is a basic standard of living, there's basic human rights so that people can thrive. Yeah, but beloved community, without a spiritual element in your activism, your activism, you can burn out, you can become cynical, and people can be very aggressive in those groups, acting out their trauma. It's just without a spiritual element, without coming back to peace, that kind of activism is often not sustainable. Yeah, so spiritual friendship it can be deeply rewarding, but you'll also sometimes find that sometimes some really messed up people turn up at spiritual centers as well. And that can be hard, that can make you be like, I'm not going to go to the monastery next weekend because that person's there again, and they're like, they're a bit like a hungry ghost, they turn up and they suck all the joy out of the room. And they know that a monastery is an accepting place, like where people will try to be nice to them. So they go there and kind of suck up that energy and share their suffering, but they just take all the energy, they don't give much back. My teacher gave me some really good advice when I started as the spiritual program coordinator at our center. He was like, don't think that everybody who comes here is enlightened. Mostly the people that are coming here are suffering. And if they were well adjusted, they'd probably just stay home on Sunday. And of course, that's not the case with everybody. Some people are really lovely. But I did see that element of people over the years. But the balance is really important, just that you have a balance of people who are well adjusted and functioning, and people who are, not doing well, that others can hold space for them. But you can't just have a sangha of people who are all not doing well. Like there was a person who applied to come here a week ago who is homeless, living in a tent, and wanted to be a monastic. And like they just told me everything that had happened in their life. There's so much going on in their life with addiction and all kinds of things, and straight away I just knew, like, this person is not a candidate for monastic life. Monastic life can't just be, or a monastery can't be a place that you run away when your life doesn't work, because a monastery is a place where your mental afflictions will come up even more intensely because you have no escape. All you do at a monastery is look at your mind. So it's like when you come to a monastery, you're popping a big cyst or something, and it all explodes. And you're living, like, people think they'll come to a monastery and I can't deal with society, I don't want to be around people, so I'll just come to a monastery and be alone and be peaceful. But then they're living in a community and they've got to turn up every morning, and actually you're more in each other's faces. So all of your social conditioning and your trauma around family, if you're living in a community with nothing else to do, it will all come out at a monastery. And that's why we have a screening process, and we can certainly offer people a refuge for some period of time. But if they're not ready to do that intense kind of growth, it can be really, it can be very disturbing for the other people in the community. If someone like that comes and they're not in like all their strong karma is coming out, and they become a kind of liability for the community, So I always have to be a little bit careful when people turn up and say they want to come. Yeah, and I think it's still early days, but we are in a fairly remote place, so it's going to take time to grow. Yeah, so that's my talk on beloved community. I really think, when more than one person stands up for a cause, it makes such a difference. Like, look at Greta Thunberg, just strike for climate. One girl in front of, I think it was the Parliament House or wherever she was sitting, became a whole movement of students, became a whole, like thousands, millions of people protesting all around the world. And a lot of people who were feeling hopeless about climate change, that there is no, that people don't care, and feeling helpless and that nothing can be done. I mean, still a lot more needs to be done, but at least when you march and when you stand up against something that's wrong, you don't feel helpless. You know that there are other people who care and want a better world and want the same things you do. And that the fact that those people stand up with you is a profound act of solidarity. And one shouldn't underestimate the act of more than one person coming together for a common goal. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful. So even if you're just a Sangha of one, you start by befriending yourself. You start by being your own friend, and being able to hold space for your own emotions, and your own challenges, instead of just living in distraction all the time. To make time to look at your own mind and purify your own mind. It definitely makes life better. Not to say that it isn't it, that looking into your own heart and dealing with your own trauma and your own emotions and purifying your mind and finding better habits is an easy thing. If it was an easy thing, more people would be doing it, I guess, But it's a case that when you look at your mind, you see that there's some unpleasant things there, like when you need to pop a cyst, the pus comes out and it's a bit unpleasant, but it feels so much better when the pus is gone. So likewise, on the spiritual path, undertaking it, finding the discipline to do it can be hard, but having done it, there is great, excuse me, there is great joy. Yeah. So do you have any questions? No? Thank you.